The moment someone decides who you are without learning your story is often the moment they begin writing their own greatest mistake. Early Saturday morning sunlight stretched across the quiet streets of Ashford, Virginia, where family-owned stores opened one by one and the smell of fresh coffee drifted through the cool spring air. Most weekends looked exactly the same in this peaceful town, where neighbors greeted one another by name and children rode bicycles beneath rows of maple trees. Nothing suggested that before the afternoon arrived, one ordinary encounter would become a story repeated across military circles, law enforcement seminars, and dinner tables throughout the country. A black man wearing a simple gray jacket parked an aging pickup truck along Main Street before stepping onto the sidewalk with calm confidence. His name was Marcus Bennett. He carried no visible sign of importance, no expensive watch, no security detail, and no reason for anyone passing by to imagine that he had spent decades leading some of the nation's finest military professionals. He had returned to Ashford for one reason only. An old friend who had served beside him many years earlier was celebrating his retirement, and Marcus had promised that no matter how demanding life became, he would never miss the day his friend finally came home for good. Marcus walked slowly toward a small neighborhood house carrying nothing more than a neatly wrapped gift bag and a warm smile. Along the way, he paused to help an elderly woman lift 2 heavy flower pots from the trunk of her sedan onto her front porch. She thanked him sincerely, unaware that the quiet stranger offering assistance had spent much of his life making decisions that affected thousands of service members around the world. Marcus simply wished her a wonderful weekend before continuing down the sidewalk. Across the street, Officer Daniel Harper noticed the unfamiliar pickup truck while finishing a routine patrol. Beside him sat Officer Travis Cole, who glanced at the license plate before looking toward Marcus as he approached the neighborhood. Neither officer recognized the visitor. Harper commented that unfamiliar vehicles occasionally required a closer look, especially near residential homes where recent complaints about suspicious activity had increased. Cole agreed, although nothing about the man appeared hurried or nervous. Marcus calmly reached the front gate of his friend's property just as the 2 patrol officers stepped from their cruiser. Harper greeted him politely but firmly, asking whether he lived in the neighborhood and requesting identification. Marcus smiled respectfully, explained that he was visiting an old military friend, and reached slowly toward his wallet exactly as instructed. Before he could remove it completely, Harper noticed a worn leather credential holder tucked beside several ordinary business cards. The edge of a faded challenge coin briefly caught the morning sunlight before disappearing back inside the wallet. Harper barely glanced at either item. To him, they looked like souvenirs collected by countless veterans over the years. Marcus handed over his driver's license without hesitation and waited quietly while the officers examined it. His calm demeanor never changed. He asked no special favors, offered no impressive titles, and made no attempt to influence the conversation. Nearby neighbors began watching from their porches, sensing the quiet tension settling over the peaceful street. An elderly veteran walking his dog slowed almost immediately after noticing Marcus from across the road. Recognition flashed across the older man's face, but before he could cross the street, a delivery truck temporarily blocked his path. By the time it moved away, the conversation between Marcus and the officers had already become more serious than anyone standing nearby fully understood. And although no one realized it yet, the smallest decision made during those next few minutes would quietly set in motion an extraordinary chain of events reaching far beyond the little town of Ashford. Marcus Bennett remained exactly where he stood, his hands relaxed at his sides while Officer Daniel Harper examined the driver's license with growing uncertainty. Everything printed on the card appeared legitimate. The address matched the registration on the pickup truck. The photograph matched the man standing quietly before him, and nothing immediately suggested criminal activity. Even so, Harper continued asking questions that grew increasingly detailed. Marcus answered each one with calm precision. He explained that he had driven nearly 200 miles that morning to attend the retirement celebration of a longtime military friend who had recently returned to Ashford after decades of service. He offered the name of the homeowner, the scheduled gathering later that afternoon, and even the local church where several guests planned to meet afterward. Nothing in his explanation sounded hurried or rehearsed. Officer Travis Cole quietly listened while observing Marcus more carefully than before. Most people stopped during a police encounter displayed visible frustration after only a few minutes, but Marcus never raised his voice or interrupted. His posture remained naturally straight, his breathing steady, and his answers respectful without sounding submissive. Years of discipline seemed to shape every movement, although Cole could not explain why that impression stayed with him. Harper returned the driver's license but continued the conversation, asking whether Marcus possessed any additional identification. Marcus slowly opened his wallet once more. As he removed another card holder, the worn challenge coin slipped free for an instant before landing gently in his palm. He immediately picked it up and returned it to its place without making any comment. Harper barely glanced toward it, assuming it was another keepsake purchased at a military gift shop. Cole, however, noticed that the coin carried an unfamiliar insignia unlike any souvenir he had ever seen. Before he could ask about it, Harper shifted the discussion in another direction. He explained that several recent reports had caused officers to pay closer attention to unfamiliar visitors entering residential neighborhoods. Marcus acknowledged the explanation with a polite nod and replied that public safety depended upon careful officers, but fairness depended upon careful judgment. His words carried neither criticism nor resentment. They sounded like a principle he had repeated many times throughout his life. Across the street, the elderly veteran finally reached the sidewalk after the delivery truck moved away. The moment he looked directly at Marcus, recognition spread across his face. He started walking toward the group with clear purpose, but another neighbor stopped him to ask about directions to the community center. The brief conversation delayed him only a minute, yet that minute would quietly change everything. Harper asked Marcus whether he would mind accompanying the officers to clarify several remaining questions. Marcus calmly asked whether he was being detained or simply assisting with an inquiry. Harper answered that the situation would move much faster if everyone cooperated at the station. Marcus paused for only a moment before agreeing. He explained that he intended to attend his friend's retirement celebration and hoped the misunderstanding could be resolved quickly. Nearby neighbors exchanged uncertain glances as Marcus walked peacefully beside the officers toward the patrol vehicle. No one heard raised voices. No one witnessed resistance. The atmosphere felt strangely quiet, almost as though every person watching sensed that something important had been overlooked. As the patrol vehicle slowly pulled away from the curb, the elderly veteran finally reached the now empty sidewalk. He looked first toward the departing cruiser and then toward the small house where the celebration banners had already begun appearing in the front yard. His expression changed from surprise to deep concern as he quietly whispered to himself that the officers had just driven away with a man whose name would mean far more than they could possibly imagine. The patrol vehicle rolled quietly through the streets of Ashford, while Marcus Bennett watched familiar neighborhoods pass beyond the window without showing the slightest trace of frustration. Officer Daniel Harper remained focused on the road, convinced that bringing the visitor to the station was the safest way to settle unanswered questions before the retirement gathering attracted a larger crowd. Officer Travis Cole sat beside Marcus, occasionally studying the quiet passenger whose calm seemed almost impossible to disturb. Most people placed in the back of a patrol vehicle filled the silence with complaints, questions, or anxious explanations. Marcus did none of those things. He simply looked out the window as church bells echoed across the town square, knowing that his old friend's celebration had already begun. After several minutes, Cole finally asked whether Marcus had served in the military. Marcus smiled politely before answering that service had shaped much of his life and taught him that patience often revealed more than arguments ever could. Harper overheard the exchange but continued driving without responding. To him, military service alone explained very little because Ashford was home to many veterans. The patrol vehicle arrived at the station just before noon. Inside the lobby, the atmosphere reflected an ordinary weekend shift. A dispatcher answered routine calls, while two deputies completed paperwork behind the front counter. Marcus stepped inside without hesitation, thanked the officers for opening the door, and waited exactly where he was instructed. Several people glanced toward him before returning to their work, unaware that the quiet visitor standing in the reception area carried responsibilities extending far beyond the walls of the small department. Harper explained that the station needed to verify several details before concluding the encounter. Marcus nodded respectfully and replied that he understood the importance of following established procedures. He asked only one question. He requested permission to make a single telephone call once the administrative process allowed it. Harper agreed, believing the request was perfectly reasonable, and instructed the dispatcher to provide access after the initial information had been recorded. While Marcus waited, Cole quietly placed the challenge coin that had briefly slipped from Marcus's wallet onto the evidence counter only long enough to document personal property before returning it. One of the senior dispatchers happened to notice the unfamiliar insignia stamped into the weathered metal. She frowned thoughtfully, convinced she had seen the same emblem years earlier, during a joint emergency preparedness conference involving senior military officials. Before she could remember where, another incoming call demanded her immediate attention. At almost the same moment, the elderly veteran from Ashford hurried through the front entrance carrying noticeable concern across his face. He politely asked whether a man named Marcus Bennett had recently been brought to the station. Harper looked surprised that someone had arrived asking for Marcus so quickly. The veteran explained that he had recognized Marcus immediately, but had been delayed before reaching the sidewalk. Harper casually replied that everything was under control and that the visitor was simply assisting with routine questions. The veteran looked toward Marcus for a long moment before quietly lowering his voice. He urged Harper to verify every detail with exceptional care because the man standing calmly across the room was not someone whose identity should ever be judged by appearance alone. Harper thanked him for the advice but remained convinced that standard procedures would provide every necessary answer. A few minutes later, the dispatcher nodded toward Marcus and informed him that the telephone was available. Marcus thanked everyone present, lifted the receiver without the slightest urgency, and calmly requested a secure contact number from memory. No one inside the station recognized the sequence of numbers he recited. Yet within seconds the expression on the dispatcher's face subtly changed as the call connected to an office far beyond anything anyone inside the building expected. Marcus Bennett spoke in a calm, measured voice that carried the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to making important decisions without unnecessary emotion. He identified himself only by name and requested that the person on the other end of the secure line verify his current location and relay a simple message through the appropriate military channels. He offered no explanation to the officers standing nearby, made no mention of rank, and asked for no special treatment. After thanking the individual who answered the call, he gently returned the receiver to its cradle and resumed, waiting exactly where Officer Daniel Harper had instructed him to stand. Harper watched the brief conversation with mild curiosity but saw nothing unusual. Many people contacted attorneys, family members, or employers after arriving at a police station. To him, the call appeared no different. Officer Travis Cole, however, noticed one detail that stayed in his mind. Marcus had not searched through his wallet or looked at a contact list before dialing. Every digit had come directly from memory, and the dispatcher who had connected the call seemed unusually careful while establishing the secure connection. Even so, the station quickly returned to its normal routine. Telephones rang, deputies completed reports, and visitors entered the lobby seeking assistance with everyday concerns. Marcus remained patient throughout the passing minutes, occasionally looking through the front windows toward the bright afternoon sunlight. He knew his friend's retirement celebration was already underway, yet there was no frustration on his face. The elderly veteran who had followed the patrol vehicle quietly approached him and asked whether everything would be resolved in time for the ceremony. Marcus smiled warmly and answered that important occasions were measured by people rather than schedules. If he arrived late but his friend enjoyed a joyful day surrounded by family, that was what truly mattered. The veteran nodded with quiet respect before stepping aside. Across the room, the dispatcher who had connected the telephone call suddenly looked toward her computer as a notification appeared across the secure communication system. She frowned slightly, read the message twice, and immediately stood from her chair. Without speaking aloud, she carried a printed notice directly into the office of the watch commander. Less than a minute later, the watch commander emerged with a more serious expression than before. He quietly asked Harper where the visitor had made his call, and whether anyone had documented the contact. Harper answered that everything had followed normal procedure. The commander simply nodded before returning to his office and placing another telephone call behind the closed door. Cole exchanged a puzzled glance with Harper. Neither officer understood why an ordinary inquiry had suddenly attracted the command staff's attention. Outside the station, two dark government sport utility vehicles entered Ashford without using emergency lights or sirens. They traveled at the posted speed limit, blending naturally into the afternoon traffic before turning toward the police department. Few people noticed them, and those who did assumed they belonged to another state agency visiting the town. Inside the station, Marcus remained composed, thanking the dispatcher when she offered him a cup of coffee and politely declining with a smile. He folded his hands comfortably in front of him and waited in complete silence. Moments later, the watch commander's office telephone rang once again. This time, the conversation lasted only a few seconds before the commander's posture changed completely. He looked toward the lobby through the glass window, took a slow breath, and quietly instructed every available supervisor to report to the front desk immediately because an official communication had just arrived from the Pentagon, and nothing inside the station would remain ordinary after the next few minutes. The atmosphere inside the Ashford Police Department changed so gradually that few people noticed it at first. The watch commander stepped from his office carrying a printed communication that had arrived through a secure federal channel. His face revealed neither panic nor anger, only the unmistakable seriousness of someone who understood that every decision made during the next few minutes would matter. Officer Daniel Harper watched as his supervisor quietly asked the dispatcher to place all non-essential calls on temporary hold. Officer Travis Cole noticed another unusual detail. Every supervisor in the building had been instructed to report immediately to the front lobby instead of gathering inside the conference room as they normally would. Marcus Bennett remained exactly where he had been standing since ending his telephone call. He thanked a deputy who offered him a chair but politely chose to remain standing. His calm expression had not changed since arriving at the station. He neither demanded answers nor questioned the delay. The elderly veteran waiting near the reception area observed Marcus with quiet respect, recognizing the same patience that had defined countless military leaders throughout history. Outside the station, the two dark government sport utility vehicles came to a smooth stop without attracting unnecessary attention. Several professionally dressed officials stepped onto the sidewalk, accompanied by uniformed military personnel who carried themselves with unmistakable discipline. They did not hurry toward the entrance. Instead, they walked with measured confidence, as though every movement followed an established protocol. Inside the building, the dispatcher suddenly looked up from her computer as another secure notification appeared across her screen. She immediately handed the message to the watch commander, who carefully read every line before looking directly toward Marcus. The room grew noticeably quieter. Even routine conversations between deputies slowly faded as everyone sensed that an ordinary investigation had unexpectedly become something far more significant. Harper finally approached the watch commander and quietly asked whether the federal communication concerned their visitor. The commander answered only that they would soon receive official clarification and instructed every officer present to remain professional regardless of what followed. Those words alone unsettled Harper. During his years on the force, he had never heard a supervisor issue instructions with such careful emphasis before learning the complete facts. Moments later, the front doors opened. A senior military officer entered the station accompanied by two uniformed aides, each displaying impeccable bearing. The officer greeted the watch commander with calm courtesy before presenting official identification and a sealed authorization packet. No raised voices followed. No dramatic confrontation unfolded. The documents simply passed from one set of hands to another while every person in the lobby waited in complete silence. As the watch commander reviewed the credentials, his posture subtly changed. He looked again toward Marcus Bennett, then back toward the identification folder, carefully verifying each page before nodding respectfully. Harper noticed that the commander's expression now reflected complete certainty rather than uncertainty. Cole glanced toward the worn challenge coin resting among Marcus's documented personal belongings and suddenly realized why its insignia had seemed so unfamiliar. It had never belonged to an ordinary military unit. Before anyone else could speak, another secure telephone rang inside the commander's office. He answered immediately, listened without interruption, then responded with only a few carefully chosen words acknowledging receipt of a direct instruction from the Pentagon. When he returned to the lobby, every officer instinctively turned toward him. He looked across the room before quietly announcing that all questions regarding Marcus Bennett's identity had now been officially resolved through the highest military authority. The complete details would be explained within moments, but one instruction contained in the communication required immediate compliance. Hearing those words, every conversation inside the station stopped completely, because no one present could remember the last time an order from the Pentagon had arrived carrying instructions that applied directly to an ordinary local police department. The watch commander lowered the official document with steady hands before looking directly at Marcus Bennett. The silence inside the station became almost overwhelming. Every deputy, dispatcher, and officer waited for an explanation that suddenly felt far more significant than anyone had imagined only an hour earlier. The senior military officer standing beside the commander spoke first with calm professionalism. He introduced himself as Major General William Harlan and confirmed that he had arrived under direct authorization from the Department of Defense to verify the identity of the individual currently inside the Ashford Police Department. He then turned toward Marcus, stood at full attention, and rendered a precise military salute. Marcus immediately returned the salute with the same disciplined respect before extending his hand in greeting. The simple exchange transformed the atmosphere inside the room more completely than any dramatic speech ever could. Officer Daniel Harper stared in complete disbelief. Officer Travis Cole slowly looked toward the challenge coin resting with Marcus's documented belongings, finally understanding why its insignia had seemed so unfamiliar. It had represented a level of military service few people would ever encounter during their careers. Major General Harlan addressed the watch commander with measured clarity. He explained that Marcus Bennett was a serving four-star general whose current responsibilities required direct coordination with senior leadership at the Pentagon. His visit to Ashford had been entirely personal, involving the retirement celebration of a longtime friend and fellow veteran. There had been no criminal investigation, no security concern, and no federal alert connected to his presence in town. The communication received from the Pentagon had one immediate instruction. Every member of the department was to recognize General Bennett according to established military protocol before any further administrative action continued. The watch commander acknowledged the directive without hesitation. He faced Marcus respectfully before asking every sworn officer present to stand at attention. Chairs quietly slid backward across the floor as deputies and supervisors formed an orderly line throughout the lobby. Harper felt his heart sink as the full weight of the morning settled upon him. Only hours earlier he had seen an unfamiliar visitor. Now he realized he had been speaking to one of the highest-ranking military leaders in the nation without ever recognizing the extraordinary responsibility carried so quietly behind an ordinary appearance. At the commander's signal, every officer rendered a formal salute toward General Bennett. The room remained perfectly still. No one spoke. No cameras recorded the moment. No applause followed. It was simply a solemn acknowledgement of service, responsibility, and lawful authority carried out with complete professionalism. General Bennett returned the salute with calm dignity before quietly asking everyone to relax. He thanked the officers for their professionalism and immediately requested that the encounter continue with respect for everyone involved. He made no attempt to embarrass anyone, demanded no special privilege, and expressed appreciation for the difficult responsibilities carried by local law enforcement every day. Major General Harlan observed the exchange with quiet admiration before remarking that this response reflected exactly why General Bennett continued earning the trust of service members throughout the armed forces. The watch commander personally returned Marcus's wallet, challenge coin, and identification, offering a sincere apology for the misunderstanding. Marcus accepted his belongings with a warm smile and replied that procedures existed to protect communities. But every procedure achieved its greatest purpose only when guided by patience, fairness, and careful judgment. Those simple words carried through the station more powerfully than any order from the Pentagon. In that quiet moment, Every person standing inside the Ashford Police Department understood that genuine authority was never measured by how loudly it announced itself, but by the humility with which it served others, even when no one yet recognized the person standing before them. General Marcus Bennett lowered his salute and thanked every officer in the room before the silence gradually gave way to the ordinary sounds of the station once again. No one hurried to speak. The significance of the moment seemed to settle over every person present with quiet weight. Major General William Harlan accepted the sealed authorization packet from the watch commander and confirmed that all identification procedures had been completed according to the directive received from the Pentagon. He then stepped aside, allowing General Bennett to address the room in his own way. Marcus looked first toward Officer Daniel Harper, then toward Officer Travis Cole, before calmly thanking them for remaining professional throughout the encounter. His words surprised everyone. There was no anger in his voice and no desire to embarrass anyone. He explained that every profession carried tremendous responsibility because people often made important decisions with incomplete information. What mattered most was the willingness to learn once the full picture became clear. Harper listened quietly, replaying every decision he had made since first seeing the unfamiliar pickup truck parked outside the retirement home. He realized that although procedures existed for public safety, assumptions could quietly influence judgment if they were allowed to replace careful observation. Cole admitted that several small details had seemed unusual from the beginning, including the challenge coin, Marcus's disciplined posture, and the respect shown by the elderly veteran, yet he had never connected those clues before events overtook them. Marcus smiled gently and replied that experience often taught people to notice what titles never could. Character usually revealed itself long before identity did. The elderly veteran stepped forward with visible emotion and thanked Marcus for remaining exactly the same man he had known decades earlier. He recalled that even after receiving promotions, Marcus had always insisted on carrying his own equipment, greeting junior service members by name, and listening before speaking. Major General Harlan nodded in agreement, adding that those habits had earned General Bennett lasting respect throughout the military far more than the stars on his uniform ever had. The watch commander then apologized personally for the inconvenience caused by the misunderstanding and assured Marcus that the department would review the encounter as an opportunity to strengthen training, communication, and decision-making. Marcus accepted the apology without hesitation. He explained that accountability should never exist to assign permanent blame, but to build stronger institutions capable of serving every member of the community with fairness and dignity. Those words lingered throughout the station long after he finished speaking. Outside, neighbors had begun gathering near the community center, where the retirement celebration continued. Several veterans noticed the government vehicles leaving the police department and quietly smiled as they saw General Bennett walking toward the entrance beside Major General Harlan rather than behind him. Before stepping outside, Marcus turned once more toward Harper and Cole. He thanked them for choosing public service and reminded them that every badge, every uniform, and every position of authority represented a promise to protect trust as carefully as public safety. Harper nodded with sincere respect, understanding that the greatest lesson of the day had not come from a Pentagon directive or a military salute. It had come from witnessing extraordinary authority carried with extraordinary humility. As General Bennett stepped into the warm afternoon sunlight and continued toward his friend's long-awaited retirement celebration, everyone inside the Ashford Police Department quietly understood that the memory they would carry forward was not the moment they saluted a four-star general, but the moment they discovered that genuine leadership never demanded respect because it inspired it through patience, integrity, and unwavering character. The retirement celebration at the Ashford Community Center had already become the kind of gathering people remembered long after the decorations disappeared. Families filled the picnic tables, veterans exchanged stories beneath large oak trees, and children laughed as local volunteers served homemade food prepared by neighbors who believed every service member deserved a warm welcome home. General Marcus Bennett arrived quietly beside Major General William Harlan, making every effort to avoid becoming the center of attention. His longtime friend, retired Sergeant First Class Thomas Walker, immediately crossed the lawn with a broad smile and embraced him warmly before thanking him for keeping a promise made decades earlier. Marcus replied that some commitments deserved to be honored regardless of distance or circumstance. Their reunion reflected years of mutual respect built through shared sacrifice rather than words alone. A few minutes later, Officer Daniel Harper and Officer Travis Cole arrived at the community center after completing the necessary reports at the station. They had not come because anyone ordered them to attend. They came because both believed the day deserved a proper ending. Harper approached General Bennett with quiet humility and thanked him once again for the grace he had shown throughout an unexpectedly difficult morning. Standing before local families, veterans, and fellow officers, Harper acknowledged that effective public service required more than following procedures. It demanded patience, careful observation, and the willingness to see every individual as a person before reaching conclusions. General Bennett listened respectfully before shaking Harper's hand and reminding everyone nearby that trust grew strongest when people possessed the courage to learn from difficult moments instead of pretending they had never happened. The surrounding conversations gradually slowed as neighbors recognized the sincerity of the exchange. No one applauded. No one treated the moment like a ceremony. It felt genuine because it reflected accountability rather than performance. Major General Harlan later addressed the gathering, thanking the Ashford community for supporting veterans and emphasizing that strong communities depended upon cooperation between military families, local residents, and law enforcement professionals who respected one another's shared mission of service. His remarks remained brief because he believed actions carried greater influence than speeches. Throughout the afternoon, General Bennett spent more time listening than talking. He encouraged young students to ask veterans about leadership, perseverance, and responsibility. He thanked volunteers individually for preparing the event. He quietly helped move folding chairs after noticing several older guests struggling with the heavier equipment. More than one visitor expressed surprise that someone holding such a senior position worked alongside everyone else without hesitation. Thomas Walker simply smiled and explained that Marcus had never believed leadership began at the top of a table. Leadership began wherever someone chose to help. Officer Cole watched those small moments unfold and finally understood why every clue from earlier that morning had pointed toward the same truth. Extraordinary authority often revealed itself through ordinary kindness long before titles ever entered the conversation. As the afternoon sunlight settled across the town square, neighbors returned home carrying more than memories of a retirement celebration. They carried a reminder that dignity, humility, and fairness possessed the power to transform misunderstanding into respect. General Bennett looked across the peaceful gathering one final time before quietly thanking his friend for inviting him back to Ashford. The town had begun the day with assumptions, but it would remember the evening for something far greater. It would remember that the strongest example of leadership came from a man who never needed to announce who he was because his character had already spoken long before anyone learned his rank. As evening settled over Ashford, the last folding chairs disappeared beneath the community center pavilion. The final American flags were carefully gathered, and families slowly returned home carrying more than leftovers and photographs. They carried a story that would quietly shape the way many of them viewed authority, service, and character for years to come. General Marcus Bennett stood beside his longtime friend, retired Sergeant First Class Thomas Walker, watching volunteers finish cleaning the grounds. Thomas smiled and thanked Marcus for making the long drive despite everything that had happened earlier that day. Marcus answered that friendships built through years of service were never measured by convenience. They were measured by promises kept, even when unexpected obstacles appeared along the way. Major General William Harlan shook Marcus's hand before preparing to depart with the military delegation. Before leaving, he remarked that the Pentagon had not been concerned merely because of a senior officer's identity. It had acted because respect for lawful authority and proper communication protected every institution that served the American people. Marcus quietly agreed, adding that the strongest organizations never feared examining difficult moments because improvement always began with honest reflection. Nearby, Officer Daniel Harper and Officer Travis Cole finished speaking with several veterans before approaching Marcus one final time. Harper explained that the department had already scheduled a professional review of the day's encounter so future officers could learn from the experience. Marcus thanked him sincerely and reminded both officers that every career eventually included moments people wished they could revisit. What truly defined a public servant was not whether mistakes occurred but whether wisdom grew from them afterward. Cole smiled respectfully and admitted that he would never again overlook the quiet details that often revealed far more than appearances ever could. Marcus nodded gently, replying that character usually introduced itself long before titles did, if people were willing to notice. As the last government vehicles departed without ceremony, Ashford slowly returned to its familiar rhythm. Store owners closed their doors, porch lights flickered on across peaceful neighborhoods, and the same streets that had witnessed uncertainty that morning now reflected calm once again. Marcus climbed into his aging pickup truck, placing the worn challenge coin back inside his wallet beside the simple photographs he carried of family, friends, and fellow service members. The four-star general left town in the same ordinary vehicle that had first arrived unnoticed only hours earlier. There was no motorcade, no public announcement, and no celebration marking his departure. That quiet ending somehow felt perfectly fitting. Long after the retirement celebration became another cherished memory, people throughout Ashford continued repeating one lesson above all others. They remembered that genuine leadership had entered their town without demanding recognition, had answered every question with patience instead of pride, had accepted respect with humility instead of triumph, and had transformed misunderstanding into a lesson about dignity and fairness. Officer Harper often recalled the morning whenever he welcomed unfamiliar visitors into the community, reminding younger officers that every person deserved to be treated with professionalism before assumptions took root. The story of that remarkable Saturday eventually spread far beyond Ashford, not because a four-star general had received a salute, but because everyone who witnessed the day discovered something far greater. Authority may command attention for a moment, but character earns respect for a lifetime, and the strongest leaders are always the ones who never need the world to know who they are before choosing to serve it with honor.